Oh, yeah, that's right. When's the test? Does anyone have a syllabus that would say on it when the test is? Well, look at mine. December 5th. Is that a good day for a test? Come on. Yay, I'm famous. So when I show up here, you're gonna have to focus on up there.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay. And you can zoom in. Do you know how to zoom in and zoom out? There's little there's little that up there. If you push that, it zooms in. If you push that, it zooms out.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So this guy is Charles Darwin, and he is a famous naturalist who came up with this theory of natural selection, which I have outlined on the board here, and we're going to talk about this. And if you have to write the essay on the next test, you're going to have to write about natural selection, and you're going to have to write about each of these 4 points. So we're going to talk about these. But Charles Darwin is the first guy that ever came up with this idea, natural selection, and it is a theory on how evolution works. Evolution means species changing over time. And it's an old idea. It wasn't made up by Charles Darwin. It goes back all the way to the time of the Greeks. They were talking about maybe that organisms change over time. And as we now know, looking at the fossil record and DNA evidence and all sorts of different ways, that it happens. All the trees that you see outside, they didn't always look like they do now. All the animals you see running around, dogs, cats, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. A long time ago, they don't look like they did now. They look different. Every organism, every species has changed over time. They don't all look the same. And they aren't all the same internally. And it's true of humans too. And we'll go over human evolution. But 1 million years ago, humans looked very different than they look today. And we'll talk about that too. So that's the change over time. That's what evolution is, change over time. And natural selection is how evolution works, which Charles Darwin helped to figure out. That's Charles Darwin at an older age with one of his kids. That's Charles Darwin at a younger age. This shows Charles Darwin's voyage. Charles Darwin got on a ship called the Beagle that left England when he was 22 years old. And it went down here, went along the coast of Africa a little bit, went across the ocean, went along the coast of South America, all the way down the tip of South America, all the way up, and stopped at the Galapagos for a few weeks, and went all the way across the ocean, stopped around Australia here many times for several weeks, and went over to Africa, Madagascar here, and around the tip of Africa, back to South America, and all the way back up. The whole voyage took 5 years. He started on it when he was 22 years old, not too much older than you guys. And he was 27 when he got off the boat. And what was he doing this whole time? Well, the mission was a mapping mission. The people on the boat were making maps of the coast. And so they had a lot of cartographers on there drawing maps and stuff. But they said, why not bring a naturalist with us? Let's bring a guy that studies all of nature. He can tell us what mushrooms we can eat and that sort of thing, too. Don't eat those mushrooms, those will kill you, but you can eat this mushroom. It would be valuable to have a scientist like that on board, wouldn't it? He might be able to tell us where to hunt to find food and that sort of thing. Naturalists know this kind of stuff, and most boats would have a guy like Darwin on the boat for that kind of information. Don't touch that snake. That'll probably kill you. Nice to have. So Darwin, as he was going around, he studied all types of nature. He had logbooks, just like the logbook that y'all keep. And he would draw pictures of what he saw in it. And he would take specimens. He would shoot birds, kill the birds and put them in little jars. And he would kill animals and cut their skins off and their pelts. He'd take their bones and put them in boxes. And he had fossils. He was a fossil hunter. He would dig up fossils from the rocks. He would find insects and beetles. He was a big beetle collector. He found hundreds of different beetles and all other types of insects too. And when he got off the boat, there was hardly any room in his cabin for anything else. It was stacks of books and fossils and jars and pelts and all this stuff. And they had to get lots of people to carry it off the boat for him and unload it. And then he got back to his lab in England and he started studying all this stuff. And he got bird specialists to come in and look at all the birds that he had caught. And he got reptile specialists to come in and look at the drawings he had made and some of the reptiles skins he had and that sort of thing. And he got all the smart guys in England to study all the stuff that he brought back and tell him what they thought they were. One of the things he said, when the bird specialist said, you know what, all these different birds you shot, they're all finches. And Darwin said, really? He's like, they're all finches? Well, not all the birds he shot, but a lot of them were finches. But the finches look very different from island to island. And that started getting Darwin thinking, why would the finch on this island look so much different than the finch on this island? Why wouldn't they look the same? On the mainland, they all look pretty much the same. Why on these islands do they all look so different? Something to think about. Here are the Galapagos Islands. I went there in 2009, I guess. Y'all saw the pictures yesterday. I'll show you some of those pictures and talk about it. I wish I was here to talk about them, sorry. I was doing interviews. But the Galapagos is a bunch of islands. These are all the bigger ones. There's a bunch of smaller ones they're not showing here. But I flew into this island, Baltra, and we took a boat and went to this island, and then went to this island, and down here, and across here, and up there, and there, and there, and back. I was on the boat for about a week. And we walk around on the island and then get back on the boat and go to sleep, and the next morning we were on a different island. That was a pretty cool trip. It was fun. You can't walk around on these islands all alone. You have to go with a guide. So the guide can watch you and make sure you're not messing the place up. You weren't allowed to ever leave the side of the guide. That island there has people on it. In cities and towns, there's like 100,000 people living on that island. That island there has some people on it, mostly scientists studying these volcanoes. These are active volcanoes. They have like smoke coming out of them. Most of these are all volcanic islands, but all of these are not active anymore. But that one and that one are active volcanoes. And I think maybe some of these are active too. I'm not sure. Anywho, it's a neat little area. And there's all types of iguanas, big iguanas. There's me looking at some iguanas. And they just lie around on the rocks and warm themselves up. And when they get warm enough, they jump in the water and they swim around and they eat algae and seaweed and grasses that are in the water. But the water's cold there, believe it or not. It's right on the equator, but the water is cold. Yes, Maggie?
Like, when's the last time the volcanoes have erupted?
They're erupting right now on these islands. They're constantly erupting. But these are older and have not been erupting for hundreds of thousands.
So there's like
or even
lava
millions of years.
coming out of them?
What's that?
There's lava coming out?
Lava coming out over here, yeah. And they usually kind of calm for a while with just a little smoke, and then all of a sudden, every 10 or 15 years, they'll really spit out a bunch of lava.
Wow.
You'll probably hear about it in your life, a Galapagos volcano blowing its top. It will probably happen in the next 20, 30 years, big enough where they put it on the news. But it's happening constantly to some extent. Look at them. I took that picture. Aren't they cute? I want one. There was one swimming underwater. I took that picture with an underwater camera. I was just snorkeling, and I looked over to my left, and it was... They had sea lions all over the place. They were real friendly. You weren't supposed to touch any of the animals. Sea lions. There's me sleeping with the sea lions. This is a sea lion harem. These are all females, and there's one male that runs the harem. He gets to mate with all the females. And other males will come up out of the ocean and try and fight with him for the harem. He's usually real big, he can fight them off. But he spends so much time fighting that he doesn't get to eat much. And eventually he gets weak, and somebody will take over the harem and mate with them all. And that's just how they do it. Isn't that a weird lifestyle?
Oh.
Isn't that cute? Sea lion. So Darwin came up with his theory, and his theory of natural selection has 4 points to it that you need to understand. The first point is called variation. Organisms in a population have variation. Y'all, remember we studied variation when we were talking about meiosis? Where does variation come from? There are actually 4 things. I tell you what, if you and your partner can tell me where you get variation, and I'll give you a hint, some of the ways happen in meiosis. I'll give you 5 points for each way that you can figure out where variation comes from. 5 points. You can tell me where variation comes from. People at home, you can play too.
How many points?
5 points each. You can tell me ways that we get variation. There's 4 ways that I can think of. 4 good ways. In other words, why aren't all of you the same? You're different from your brothers and sisters. Why? We're different from one another. Why are we different? Why aren't we exactly the same? There's 4 reasons. There's 4 things that make us different.
That's wonderful.
Me and Rocky, we're different. Why? Why aren't we exactly the same? There's 4 ways you get variation in population. I give you another 10 seconds because these people at home, they're getting bored. You can't think of them? You can't think of them. That's life is tough. It's not the end of the world. There'll be other questions. All right, here comes White. Yes, White got 2 of them. 10 points. Peach. Oh, yeah, Peach gets 2 of them. 10 points. Green. Nah, I'm not going to give Green any. Whoops. Sorry, people at home. People at home are very different. 2 of them for blue. Purple, I need it. Purple, what's going on? I'm not going to give purple any. So, variation comes from a lot of different parts. It comes from mutations. When a mutation happens in the DNA, it'll change the DNA. That's usually how bacteria get their variation. It comes from crossing over. Do you remember when the chromosomes crossed over in meiosis? And something that we call independent assortment. Remember that? When the chromosomes all lined up, and you could go all greens on one side and all whites on the other. Remember that? Or you could cross them up and go 2 greens and a white to 2 whites and a green. Y'all remember that? Yeah? That's independent assortment. And finally, your favorite, sexual reproduction. The fact that the genes of one person are mixed with the genes of a completely different person. Then you'll end up with kids that are different from either parent. That's sexual reproduction, and that's a good source of variation. That's why organisms reproduce sexually. So they'll have lots of variation for their kid. So, if we apply that to the giraffe, early giraffes probably had necks of various lengths. Variation. Now, heritability is the fact that offspring tend to look like their parents. You pass on genes to your offspring, and they'll tend to look more like you than other organisms. That's heritability. So, variations can be passed to offspring. In other words, if you have a long neck, you'll tend to have kids with long necks. Now, they won't all be the same as you because of variation. Some of your kids will have even longer necks than you, and some of your kids will have shorter necks than you. But if you have a long neck, Sean, you look like you have a longer neck than I do. Sean has a long neck, I have a short neck. Sean's kids are going to tend to have longer necks than my kids would. Right? Because Dad had a long neck. Make sense? Now, what about this third part? Overproduction. Overproduction is the idea that more are born than can survive. Nature is a tough place. Usually, organisms will have a lot of kids, but not all of them will survive to adulthood. I'll give you an example. Roaches. A couple roaches mate. The female might lay 1,000 eggs. Are there going to be 1,000 adult roaches in a few months? No, most of those die. They're eaten by birds and lizards and spiders, and some of them starve to death. They can't find enough food, and some of them people step on, and some of them die from poisons. And not all the roaches make it to adulthood. Only a couple of them. If the roach population is going to stay the same, then for every pair of roaches that have babies, 2 of the roaches will survive and replace the parents. And that'll keep your population steady. So if more than 2 of the babies survive to adulthood, your population will go up. If less than 2 of the babies survive to adulthood, the population will go down. But on average, 2 of the 1,000 eggs will survive to adulthood. All the rest of them will die. That's an overproduction. Darwin noticed this. Lots of the little baby creatures that he studied on the Galapagos and everywhere else, a lot of them died. Now, is it random who lives and who dies? Is it just random which roaches live and which roaches die? That's the fourth part, reproductive advantage. Darwin said it's not random who lives and who dies. Organisms with variations that allow better survival tend to have more offspring. Organisms with variations that allow better survival tend to have more offspring. Darwin never used this term, but it's often called survival of the fittest. Y'all ever heard of survival of the fittest? So, if Sean has a longer neck than I do, and we both have to eat leaves, and let's pretend we didn't have arms where we could just reach up and grab them, who's going to have the advantage, me or Sean? Sean, with his long neck, is going to get more leaves than I will. And so he'll get strong over time because he's eating all these leaves, and I'll get a little weak over time. And he'll probably mate more than me because I'm weak and I'm resting all the time. And the ladies like the strong Sean who's eating a lot of leaves. And so he mates and has more kids than I do. I might only have 1 or 2 kids. He might have 10. I might die and not have kids at all, where he's well fed and he lives. So, he's got the advantage. And when he has kids, you know what the kids are going to tend to look like as far as their neck goes? Are they going to have long necks like Sean or short necks like me? They're going to have long necks like Sean because of this heritability. Because Sean had a long neck, his kids will tend to have longer necks. And over time, the population the necks will get longer and longer. That's natural selection. That's how it works. And Darwin said this probably happened with the giraffe. Eventually, only long-necked giraffes survived the competition. That's natural selection. It's that simple. I'll show it to you like this. Here's a bunch of giraffes. Some with long necks, some with short necks. The short-necked ones, they die. They're removed from the population. Now, you only got long-necked ones. They have kids. Most of their kids have long necks. Maybe a couple of them still born with short necks. Because of variation, you might still have some born with short necks, but they're not going to do so well. And they're going to be removed from the population. And if you just keep doing this over time, you'll eventually get just long-necked giraffes. So the new population is different from the old population over time. Let's think about how fast this might occur, because it's something when you look around, you don't see this occurring very fast. And the point here is it doesn't have to occur very quickly. Do you all know how long a millimeter is? Have you ever used this measurement before? Maybe in physical science? A millimeter is about the width of a dime. It is the distance between my 2 fingernails here on this ruler. It's that big. That's a millimeter. What if giraffes' necks got a millimeter longer every 100 years? Would that shock you? Would you even notice?
No.
If giraffes' necks got a millimeter longer every 100 years, you wouldn't even notice. You'd look at the giraffe and come back in 30 years and look again, and you wouldn't even notice that they're longer. But if that trend continued, then in 1,000 years, the necks would be 10 millimeters longer. That's 10 millimeters right there. About that much longer. A centimeter longer. And in 10,000 years, it'd be 10 centimeters longer. That's 10 centimeters right there. In 10,000 years. And in 100,000 years, it'd be a meter longer. Which is about that. And in 1,000,000 years, it could be 10 meters longer. Which is taller than that ceiling. In 1,000,000 years. So, at a rate of 1 millimeter every 100 years, it would get 10 meters longer in 1,000,000 years. And we find, as we look through the fossil record and we look at giraffe skeletons, giraffes' necks took about 30 million years to get as long as they are. 30 million years. So it actually happened much slower than 1 millimeter every 100 years. it might have been a millimeter every 3,000 years, which is not a fast rate of change, but it's enough to get those long-necked giraffes in 30 million years. Yeah?
Are they getting longer? Are they?
That is a good question. I do not know. The population of giraffes is going way down because of humans encroaching on their territories, shooting them, poaching them, removing their habitat. So I don't know what giraffe evolution is doing now, but they might be still getting longer. So Darwin, he went from island to island looking at organisms, and he didn't actually see the giraffes, and he didn't talk about the giraffes in his book. His book's called The Origin of Species. He didn't speak much on giraffes in his book. And by the way, I have a copy of Origin of Species right here from 1879. It's a real old copy, and it's not in very good shape. A friend gave it to me. It was from an old library that closed down. His original book was published in 1850, and I think this is the 5th edition. So he'd change it a little bit every 4 or 5 years and come out with a new edition that had changes in it. So I think this is the 5th edition. This was the last edition he made changes to, and then he died in the 1870s and didn't make any more changes. So this one right here is an exact copy of that one right there. This is just a newer copy. But anyway, and you could go in there and read this whole book where he lays out all his evidence, or actually this is a summary of his evidence. His evidence is 30,000 pages long, and this is about a 500-page book. So he has a lot of writings and evidence, and it wasn't just stuff from the Beagle, it was from his whole life of research. He studied it for 30 years before he wrote his book. And some of the stuff that he saw that he describes in this book are the turtles on the Galapagos. Almost all islands had these giant tortoises on them. And some of the islands are still there today. Some of them they've gone extinct from human hunting. But on one of the islands, the tortoises have real long necks, just like a giraffe. Look at that neck on that thing. Isn't that cool? Only a couple islands have real long neck tortoises, but one island in particular has real long neck tortoises. And I took that picture when I was on the Galapagos. Look how long that neck is.
God.
Don't you just want to reach out and grab that neck? On the island where there's long neck tortoises, the only thing for the tortoises to eat are giant cactuses. That's all the food is. If you look around on this island, there's nothing else good to eat for the tortoises. They eat these giant cactuses. And that cactus is too big for a tortoise to ever reach. But some of the cactuses are shorter than that. There's me by one of those giant cactuses. Look, there's me trying to reach a giant cactus. I can't quite get it. I'm going to starve. See those little tiny cactus pads, those things? That's what those tortoises will eat. And what happened was, the cactuses didn't used to be this tall. The cactuses used to be shorter. And the tortoises, with the neck, would reach up and eat the shorter cactuses, you see. And the cactuses started to die. The short ones started to die. Only the taller cactuses lived. So the cactuses evolved along with the tortoises. The cactuses got taller and taller. The tortoises' necks got longer and longer over time. That's called coevolution, Darwin calls it. It's just like the giraffe. The shorter neck tortoises on that island didn't have anything to eat, so they'd all die out. Only the longer neck tortoises survived. There's me on a different island. And look how short that cactus is. On this island, there was other stuff for the tortoises to eat, so they didn't eat cactuses on this island. So the cactuses never grew tall, never had to evolve to be tall. because they weren't getting eaten by tortoises. Isn't that cool? So that's the same cactus. Only on the other islands it looked like that. And on this island, it looked like that. This is some of the stuff that got Darwin thinking that his theory was correct. There's me. Look at the tortoises looking at me. You know, some of these tortoises can live 200 years. They don't even know how long these tortoises can live. There's some suspect that they might be able to live even longer than that. So some of these tortoises might have actually been around when Darwin was there.
Okay.
1850. Isn't that cool? I always thought it was a cool idea. Maybe Darwin saw that one. I think actually this one was in a park that they had, so I think they actually knew the age of this one. But some of them are real old and they don't know how old they are. I think they wrote about in his book that one time, in some book, that one time there was a drawing of Darwin riding a tortoise. Back then they didn't have rules and stuff. Aren't they cute? Tortoises, you'd just be driving by and there'd be a tortoise on the side of the road, walking along. We found this tortoise shell in one of the bars, and so I climbed in it. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles! It was real heavy. I could barely hold it up. Isn't that cool? So another thing, y'all obviously saw a whole video about it, was the finches, right? The finches on the different islands. And so look how big that beak is of that finch. And these finches have, that's a finch with a smaller, thinner beak. And that's a finch with a different sized beak. And so Darwin said, why aren't all the finches the same like on the mainland? Why do some have big beaks and some have small beaks? And he started thinking about it. And he said, oh, you know, on this island there were thick nuts on the beach that had to be cracked by the birds. And on this island, they ate little insects that were in the trees. So there's different types of food. And so if you were born with a thinner beak, you could get more insects. You had an advantage. And you have more kids, and your kids had thin beaks. But if you're on this island and you had thin beaks, you might die because there's no insects. There's just these thick seeds. And so the ones with the thicker beaks survived and had kids and got more to eat. And so some islands had, if the islands that had seeds, thick seeds to eat, they had birds evolve thick beaks. Read 15.1. And thank you for filming.